summary of some of the materials, some highlights of the course, some things I think particularly important, and then it goes on to a quiz. And I hadn't realised when writing this lecture that we were going to have morning quizzes each day, so there's a few repeat questions, but hopefully there's enough questions in here to keep you entertained for a few minutes. Okay, so what have you learned in this course? Well, first of all, FOSS is big. FOSS is enormous. Huge numbers of lines of code, huge numbers of contributors, huge numbers of packages, and to me, that is amazing. I think it's just stunning that such a large group of software has come out of tendencies that are so chaotic, that are so tending towards sort of anarchy and anti-establishment. Not everyone tends in that direction, but not everyone agrees in the way to develop FOSS. But together, the FOSS community has created an amazing set of software that can achieve pretty much anything that you can do with a computer these days. So it's a huge FOSS world out there with a very strong culture, with strongly opinionated people. And the strong opinions are important because it tends to be that people with strong opinions allow something to start, something new to start. So without those people with very strong opinions, new things wouldn't happen. And so when you see somebody expressing a very strong opinion in the free software community that you disagree with, also you need to remember that strong opinion might be the start of something really important. And maybe in a few years' time you'll agree with them. Maybe it'll turn out that they're right. Strong opinions do matter in the FOSS community to establish new things. A huge range of views and motivations in the FOSS community. A lot of people are motivated for different reasons why they're developing free software, but we can still work together to achieve an overall coherent system that really works well. So FOSS and you, how can you use FOSS? Think about that. How you can take advantage of it either at home or at the office or as a hobby or as a career. Maybe your business can use it. Maybe you can contribute to it. How many of you think you might continue contributing after the end of the assessment of this course? A few? That's fantastic. How many of you would have thought of doing that anyway without this course? Some? Maybe half of those? So that's great. So we've hopefully encouraged a few more people to contribute to the FOSS community. Or as a user. Just using the software is great too. The developers of the software are delighted when more people use it, and they're delighted to hear from you. If you do use the software and you find some aspect of it particularly good, write to the author. Take the trouble of finding out who it is. Email them and thank them for their work. Okay, so where to from here? The key to understanding FOSS is to participate. You can't just learn FOSS from a textbook, you have to actually participate. And so that's what the labs have been aiming for. Do you learn how to participate? And now in your assignments you're supposed to participate in a FOSS project to sort of understand how it really works. Try and continue with that afterwards if you can, because you'll find it's a really rich, rewarding experience. So pick projects you really enjoy working on. Don't necessarily pick a project because you think it's going to be important. Pick it because you really enjoy working on it. Because enjoying working on it will lead to doing better work on the project, and maybe the popularity will follow from that. If you try and pick a FOSS project just because it's important, then the enjoyment won't be there and probably the enthusiasm will wane after a while. So, but also step back and enjoy the big picture. I love looking at the success stories of FOSS being used in various new organisations, in developing countries, in wherever it is used in the world. The big picture really is quite amazing of the breadth of FOSS. Also be patient. It usually takes years to master the FOSS world. To really understand and be comfortable in this strange world of free software development, it does take years of participation. And hopefully those years are very enjoyable, but don't expect to understand everything just after a short course like this. So, but hopefully you should be a bit better prepared now than you were when you started. Community interaction. Think about joining a Linux user group. There's an active Linux user group here in Canberra. In fact, there's really two. There's the Canberra Linux user group, which meets here in this room once a month, the fourth Thursday of each month. And if you go to this website, club.org.au, it'll give you directions of how to get to this room and when, and tell you about the pizza and that sort of thing. Membership is defined as whoever turns up, and there's no fees. You join, it's a free mailing list, and there's lots of interesting talks and discussions. Come along and be part of the local lug. There's also there's a programmer SIG, which is branched off the CLUG group, which is particularly aimed at programmers interested in free software. And that also meets once a month on the second Thursday of each month. And the details of where that is, if you join the CLUG mailing list, then you can, which is listed on the clug.org.au site, then you can find out exactly where those events are and when. It has moved venue a little bit recently. There's also the PC user group in Canberra has a Linux user group more oriented towards beginners that meets occasionally, and they have tutorials and sessions for new users, whereas the CLUG, whereas it started out as very much for people for new users, it's now more oriented to those who are more familiar with running GNU Linux. So if you've a bit more experienced, which all of you now have some experience, CLUG is probably more appropriate. If if you know somebody else who's completely beginning in this area, the PC user group one can be a good choice. Conferences. There's so many free software conferences around the world all the time, hundreds of them each year. And you can't get to them all unless you maybe own your own private jet. But in Australia, there's really two key conferences. There's in fact several others, but two key ones that I think are really worthwhile to get to. The main one is the Linux Conference Australia, LCA, or Linux Conference Australasia, really. It now includes New Zealand, and the next one is in Wellington, I believe. Yes, in January.
Yep.
So that's held in a different city every year, either of Australia or New Zealand. Fantastic conference. Typically there's 700 or 800 people turn up to those conferences, and fantastic talks, great atmosphere, really worthwhile. How many of you have been to an LCA conference before? A few? Okay, really worthwhile getting to. It's a lot of fun, really a lot of fun, very inspiring. OSDC is another one, the Open Source Developer Conference. Last one was in Sydney last October, November, and the next one is in Brisbane later this year. And very worthwhile conference. It's oriented towards developers, particularly in the scripting languages, Python, Perl, PHP, those languages. It involves all sorts of different types of open source development, but the emphasis is on people developing for those scripting languages. You often get people like Larry Wall and Rasmus and others turning up to these types of conferences, the authors of those scripting languages turning up and participating in workshops about those languages. So if you're a programmer of one of those, then it can be a very worthwhile experience. Okay, future of FOSS. FOSS is here to stay, and it's very hard to kill a FOSS project. FOSS projects require very little funding to survive. They can hobble along for years with almost no effort, and then they can suddenly flourish again later because there's very little in the way of resources that are required. So when there's economic downturns and things, then FOSS projects can just keep going. The typical budget, the Samba project, which is used by huge numbers of people, our annual budget for the project itself is around $20,000. And we can easily get that together with a few donations. If we didn't have that $20,000, we could still survive as a project. It just would mean that some of the project members wouldn't be able to make it to one of the conferences, wouldn't be able to be funded to go to a conference. The project itself would certainly continue. So that means that the projects, even if, commercially if FOSS wasn't a success, if it wasn't being widely used, doesn't matter. Because it just takes one or two individuals who are keen on some piece of the project for it to keep going. It doesn't require it's not like a proprietary company where if it doesn't make a profit, it'll go out of business, it'll disappear. FOSS projects tend to linger on or continue regardless of how many people are using it. Unless they're specifically abandoned, unless the people who are running them really want it to go away. So it's also likely to continue to dominate in the embedded and high-performance computing space. It's got a huge market share in those spaces. And every year people predict that this will be the year for the Linux desktop. And Linux is still only a small percentage on the desktop, but maybe some year somebody will be right and Linux will take off on the desktop. And maybe it's next year, who knows, we'll see. So it's also starting to be adopted even by companies like Microsoft in a small way. They've started releasing some free software, releasing some open source software, and that's great to see. It's nice to see all the members of the IT community starting to participate in this movement. So now we've got a bit of a FOSS quiz. So we're going to be asking some questions about some areas of the course, and I'd like you to answer them. So first question, what are the key differences between the BSD and the GPL licenses? Anyone?
BSD has the old one had a credit provision where you had
right, the original one had an advertising clause, yes. Any other difference? There's one particular key difference I'm looking for.
GPL requires DriveWorks to be under the GPL, where BSD doesn't
right.
require DriveWorks to be under BSD.
That's right. The GPL license has a copyleft provision that requires the DriveWorks to be under the same license, whereas a BSD licensed work, you can take the work and use it as part of proprietary work under a proprietary license. Okay? That's a big philosophical difference between the two licenses. So many people in the BSD camp think that's a good thing, and think they want proprietary companies to be able to use their code. They don't mind if they contribute back or not, or if they release it under a proprietary license. Many people in the GPL camp think that this is it's a good thing to require it to be under the same license. And that's an ongoing debate within the community. What are the advantages and disadvantages of a distributed source code management system? Now, I've had this one before, haven't we? So what was the answer?
You can work offline.
Work offline, yes. Disadvantage?
Some of the new ones have a very steep learning curve.
Some of them have a very steep learning curve, exactly. Okay, what is a BDFL?
Benevolent dictator for life.
Benevolent dictator for life, exactly. So how does somebody become a BDFL?
Project owner himself.
The project owner, project beginner, yes.
And the one who gets, after some time he becomes he himself claims
Right.
to be.
Right. Now, it's an interesting case, the wine project, we got that presentation this morning. The wine project, Alexander Juilliard is generally proclaimed as being the BDFL, Benevolent Dictator for Life. He didn't actually start the project, but he's been the project leader for a very, very long time. And that's slightly unusual. The person who didn't start the project becomes the BDFL. It's more usual that it's the project founder. But it certainly can happen that it's not the project founder. Okay, what is the difference between a branch and a fork?
Intention to merge.
Right, intention to merge. In a branch, the developers intend to merge it back in the future. A fork, the intention is to continue as separate projects. What is the FOSS community?
Gee, that's a bit less than 1,000 words.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm hoping you're going to tell me.
A loose affiliation of unaffiliated people.
Yeah, loose affiliation of unaffiliated people. Okay.
Anyone who uses or develops open source software.
Right. The definition of this is very tricky. I mean, the FOSS community is often talked about. People often say the community thinks this, the community thinks that. What is the FOSS community? It's very hard to pin down exactly who is and isn't part of the FOSS community. Yet people often refer to the FOSS community as thinking in a particular way. What they're really referring to is the norms of the FOSS culture. But you do see this terminology, and I haven't yet seen a clear definition of what the FOSS community is, even though I use the term myself. What should a submitted patch contain?
Code.
Yeah, code. What documentation? But yes, code, okay. Something else?
The output of diff stat.
Output of diff stat, very common, yeah.
And the signing.
Signing, signed off by, if the project user signed off by, yes, or if it doesn't, you can still include it. Yeah, anything else? Explanation, right? Explanation for why the patch exists, what it's for. That's great. And a good subject line, making it so that people can just look from the subject line and try to work out what the patch is for.
Exactly what you're patching against.
Yes, exactly what files you're patching against, what version you're patching against. You need to explain it so people can apply it to the right one. Good point.
Some tangible improvement.
That's what
yes,
it should.
hopefully.
It says should.
Oh, should.
What should?
Okay. What is a derivative work?
It's another one that's debated endlessly.
Yeah, well, Roughly.
Work that's based on some pre-existing work.
Yeah, a work based on a pre-existing work. Yeah, well, there is actually a formal legal definition, although where the boundaries are set from that legal definition is where the debate tends to be. The actual definition is set down in law in most jurisdictions, pretty much all jurisdictions. Okay, what is the purpose of the signed off system? Signed off by system, I should
To
say.
give credit to it, or that one will take responsibility of that particular thing.
Right, taking credit and responsibility. Yes, there's something else though, there's something particular reason.
Signify copyright agreement.
Signify copyright, or in particular permission to use the work as part of the free software project. Right, it signifies agreement to a particular piece of legal wording that is usually embedded in the project somewhere. Okay, so it signifies that the person contributing the patch has agreed to that. And that in turn signifies that they have permission to offer the modification to the project from their employer or from themselves or whatever. They are certifying that they have that appropriate permission. How can patents harm FOSS projects?
Financially,
Financially? How do they harm it financially?
Get sued for infringing a patent.
If you get sued for infringing patents, indeed that would be a significant financial as well as headache problem. Any other ways in which patents can harm? What?
Closes off potential areas of development.
Closes off potential areas of development, exactly. Yep. Anything else?
Cause rework, having to think about it, waste time trying to avoid them.
Wasting time trying to avoid them, yes. Anything else? It can fragment the community, because if some people license the patent and others don't, some free software licenses allow licensing of patents. If some people license the patent, which is the usual response of a lawyer to a patent, and some people don't license the patent, then that means the community has been split, in that those that can use the software with that patented technique and those who can't. And that splits the development. And that fragmentation means you have less resources to develop the program. Okay? What is TiVoization?
Releasing the software but locking down the hardware.
Releasing the software but locking down the hardware, locking it down so that what can't be done?
Modifications in the software will run on the hardware.
So that modifications to the software won't run on the hardware that the software was designed for. Yep, exactly. How are FOSS licenses enforced?
Copyright law.
Copyright law, yes. And what techniques? What is actually done to enforce a license?
Community pressure.
Sorry? Community pressure, yes. Anything else?
Use of those free lawyer dudes.
Yeah. Use of free legal resources, yes. What's the first reaction typically to try to enforce a license?
Send them a letter.
Yes,
Send them a letter, and the letter should be friendly, unfriendly.
Friendly.
Friendly, that's right. Friendly communication. Communicating to them their obligations in a friendly manner to help them overcome the infringement.
Also known as education.
Yes, education. And you need to also discover if they really are infringing it. You know, it might be that you don't understand. There might be that they are in fact releasing the source code somewhere, just you weren't aware where it was. You missed the link. Or you didn't, and I've run across that a number of times where I've bought a device, I thought it was in violation, I talked to them, and then I discovered in fact they did have a link. It was just hidden behind a closed door guarded by a panther. So it can be hard to find. So, what are the common types of FOSS business model?
money from advertising.
You've seen this one before. Sorry, advertising,
Provide support.
providing support,
dual licensing,
dual licensing,
proprietary add-ons,
proprietary add-ons,
hardware,
hardware. Great.
Well done.
Okay, what is EgoBoo?
digital broadcasting.
Thank you. Some better definition than that. EgoBoo.
Ego boost.
Ego boosting. Right. It's the reward that somebody gets when they contribute something that is respected by their peers. What is the differences between cathedral development and bazaar development?
Cathedral decision is decided by the leader most of the times.
Right. In cathedral, most of the decisions are decided by the leader. Yeah.
Bazaar is everyone can contribute the ideas.
Yeah,
decided by.
so bizarre, sort of everyone contributes. It's sort of free-flowing versus more structured. And decentralization of the development system.
Behind closed doors versus open doors.
Behind closed doors development versus open doors, everything in the open development. Yep. Okay, what is a hacker? In the free software community, what is a hacker?
Someone who enjoys the technical challenge of developing software.
Somebody who enjoys the technical challenge of something. Usually in developing software in the FOSS community, but there are hardware hackers as well. There are hackers for all sorts of things. Okay, so thank you. So that's the last lecture for the course. Hope you've enjoyed it. We'll now go back and hear the rest of the presentations from the students. And please fill in an evaluation form that we haven't printed out. When do we do that?
We'll do it later on.
We'll do evaluations at some stage because we need to get your feedback so we can improve the course in future years. Great. Okay, thank you very much.
It's probably too early to have afternoon tea, so why don't we do another hour or so of presentation?
As I said, I deliberately tried to make that lecture much shorter so we'd have plenty of time for the presentation.
And then we can have afternoon